Very warm welcome to Crowd Church, the very technical, efficient, always working, always on church that we are. Never have any issues. Beside me is the beautiful Jack Mariner, who's joined me to host tonight.
Hello, lovely to see you all. I think you might have been able to hear my ramblings before, but lovely to see it. It's like Saturday night takeaway, isn't it? Anton Deck, eat your heart out.
Yeah.
I think
I bet you they don't have these tech issues.
No, they don't. They used to. I think it was the foreman of them, so you never know. Watch out.
Okay, yeah, fair play. But no, listen, thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining us online. Tonight we are hopefully looking at the story of Cain and Abel, one of the most famous stories from the Bible. We're going through the book of Genesis. I think this is Genesis part 9. Is that right?
Sounds
I
about
think
right,
so, yeah. Part 9, and Pete's going to be talking to us about Cain and Abel. Then hopefully we're going to get all the microphones working, because when we have Conversation Street, we're going to need at least three. Three, Dan. Have we got all three working? We have. So the green one's working as well. Is that right? Are we getting green on the screens though? Listen, here, have a microphone, Pete. Thank you very much. Woohoo! We got there finally. You take so much for granted when you do online church. It's not even funny. But listen, very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for being with us. Without further ado, let me bring on this very good-looking gentleman to my left, Mr. Pete Butland. Pete, there's going to be a little thing. You'll see it on the screen, like a little intro that Zoe's going to play, and then you'll be on. Let's get Pete on.
Well, thank you. It's smooth and slick. My church in West Derby in Liverpool, my church has a reputation for kind of being chaotic and everything going wrong. Normally the notices that we give out are wrong. There's a mistake there somehow. And I've brought it with me. So you're very welcome. You're very welcome. It's the gift I bring to offer you. As Matt said, we are continuing our journey through Genesis. We're looking at the story of Cain and Abel. It's in Genesis chapter 4. It's like the ultimate sibling rivalry with a tragic end. It goes way beyond who's better at sports, who's got the best exam results, and it deteriorates into tragedy. It would be really good, I think, just to read through some of Genesis chapter 4 and get a bit of a grasp on the story. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just selected parts, but just to get a bit of a timeline of what's going on in the story, and then I'll share sort of what I feel God's given me to share. So you've got Adam and Eve, and they have children. They have Cain and they have Abel. And it says in Genesis chapter 4, verse 2, it says, Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And if we skip down to verse 11, this is what the Lord says to Cain. "Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." And then in verse 14, Cain says, "I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." And then God says, "No, I will put a protection on you so that no one will kill you." Now, in what may seem like a random segue, I wonder if you've ever given or received an emergency Christmas present. An emergency Christmas present is that thing that you have in stock, wrapped and ready to go. So when that awkward moment happens and someone gives you a Christmas present and you weren't expecting them to, you've got something to give back. Because we know that the very British awkwardness of being given a gift and not being able to give one back is just awful. So if someone gives you a gift, you're not expecting it, you can at least say, "I've got one for you as well," even if it wasn't really intended for them. The problem with that is when you give a gift in that way, it's not really being given from the heart. It's not being given with love. It's not being given personally. It's being given to fulfill a duty, to complete an obligation, to tick a box and say, yeah, I did that. I've done it. It's okay. I've given a gift. And this is the attitude that we see from Cain. When Cain comes and brings an offering to God, he doesn't say, God, I'm bringing you a gift, and I'm delighted to do it because I love you and I want to honor you with a gift. Cain thinks, God's demanding something from me. I've got to give him something, so that's what I'll do. Cain gives out of duty and compulsion and obligation. He doesn't give out of love. His heart was not in it. It was an attitude of resentment that he had to give from what he had. An attitude affects actions. I'm going to continue the illustration with a tub which I've just thrown on the floor, which is just to enhance the slickness of what's happening this evening. I have just thrown a tub of sweets all over the floor. It's a purple tub of sweets, which I don't know whether for advertising purposes we can name, but it's a tub of sweets that gets given out around about Christmas. I'm going to share those with you. Okay, are you ready? Here they come. Catch. Oh, I've just been accused of giving out the rubbish sweets, which is a terrible, ungrateful thing to say. This makes for really, really good video. I may not be invited back. Yeah. Now, folks, I've just given sweets out to. What have I just given you from this tub of Quality Street? Am I allowed to say Quality Street? What have I given you? Other brands are available, but I've got Quality Street tonight, and I have given you all the same thing, which is a toffee penny. Why have I given you a toffee penny? Because I personally cannot be bothered with a toffee penny. They're hard, they're really sticky, they feel like they're going to pull your teeth out, and frankly, I don't want them. So I've given you the sweet that I would least like to have for myself. Don't take it personally. That's just what I've given you. This is how Cain gave. He gave out of duty and obligation, not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to. And then when he gave, he didn't give the best of what he had. He gave what he was happiest to lose. This is the attitude that Cain comes with. I don't really want to give an offering to God, but I'll have to do it. And when I do it, I'll give the bare minimum. It says that Cain brought some of the fruit from his crops. Some. And then it says Abel brought the fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. So he didn't just bring the best of what he had. He took the best of what he had, his firstborn, and he chose the best of that. And that's what he gave to God. And it tells us that God favored Abel. He looked with favor on what Abel had brought. And he didn't look with favor on what Cain had brought. Cain's furious. His feelings about the situation are written all over his face. And God says, what's up with you? You know what to do. I've explained to you how this works. I've poured out my abundance upon the earth. I've given you everything. I've given you creation as a gift to you because I love you and because I want a relationship with you. And Cain's response is to say, I'm going to give you the bare minimum to tick a box and fulfill an obligation. Cain doesn't seem to have twigged that God desires a deep and true relationship with his created humans. God has given his best to us, poured out his abundance to us in creation, and simply asks us to give our best in return in a reaction of love. He wants a deep and true loving relationship with his children. He wants us to recognize who he is and what he's done for us and respond in kind. But Cain's view of God is distorted and twisted. Rather than recognizing God's goodness, he sees God as demanding, not loving. He sees God as domineering, not generous. He sees God as controlling and not kind. Cain has given reluctantly, not his best. And then he sulks when he doesn't get the favor from God. And God speaks to Cain. He says, Cain, this is not a good start. You are putting yourself in a position where you are going to be tempted to live a life of sin, where sin is just waiting to take over. You need to take control and not let it happen. And we see what Cain's reaction is. Cain's reaction is to tempt his brother and call him out into the field and kill him. We heard from Will last week that evil comes in three words: power, perversion, and pain. Cain sees his brother's power. He sees that Abel has been favoured by God, and he thinks, I don't like that. I want that power. I want the authority that comes from God's favour. He resents it. He wants it for himself. And because he's got this perverted and distorted view of who God is and what he's like and what our relationship with God is like, he's decided that God just doesn't care about him. And from that perverted perspective comes the decision to choose violence, to inflict pain. Will Cain rule over the creature that's crouching at his door? That's sin? No. And his mum and dad didn't either. Adam and Eve were given the opportunity to rule over sin. They were given the whole earth and creation to rule over. God says, subdue it, rule over it. And yet in the first chapter of Genesis, we see the serpent, the snake, comes to them and says, you're missing out, God's not given everything that he could. He's held back things from you. Take more, there's more for you. And rather than ruling over the snake and saying, no, God has given us everything we need, Adam and Eve surrender and submit, and they lose out. So Cain actually carries on the family tradition. It's an inherited tradition that he gives in. He surrenders to the temptation. So this is a story of jealousy and sibling rivalry. It is a story that is about two brothers, one jealous of what the other one has and responding and reacting in the wrong way. But to be honest, those are just the outcomes, because there's something a lot deeper going on. What we see in the story of Cain and Abel are the natural consequences of a wrong and distorted view and understanding of God and our relationship with him. So let's just look a little bit more closely. What is the root cause of the issues going on here? It's not just two brothers who are competitive. I think if you look at the sinful moments that we see at the start of Genesis, from Adam and Eve's disobedience, Cain's reluctant giving, his jealousy and his sulking, the murder of Abel, and then when Cain gaslights God, God says to him, where's your brother? He says, I don't know. How should I know? I'm not in charge. When Cain does all those things and the sin we see from Adam and Eve, all those things come down to a lie that is told, that says that God is not enough. Adam and Eve are convinced that they haven't got enough. They haven't got everything they need. God has held things back from them, and they're entitled to more, and that God isn't giving them enough. Cain is convinced that God hasn't given him enough, and so when it comes to bringing his offering, he holds back what he thinks he needs. He takes what he thinks is enough for him because God hasn't given that to him. So he holds back his best to make sure he's got enough and gives God the bare minimum in return. And when Cain sees that God is favouring Abel, he's furious because by rights, Cain is the firstborn. He should be getting the blessing from God. He should be receiving that favour. So he feels like he's not being honoured enough. He feels like he's not respected enough by God. And from that feeling of not being enough comes the desire for violence, to pull down Abel and to elevate himself. So that's my sense of where sin kind of originates from at the start of Genesis, that there is a sense, a lie that is told about God that says God is not enough, he's not given you enough, and as a result, you are not enough. You must take responsibility and get what you need. We get a distorted, perverted picture of God being mean-spirited, tight-fisted, and uncaring. And this leads to humans feeling they don't have enough, they are not enough, and must do whatever they need to do to put that right. And that's exactly what Cain does. When he brings his offering to God, he keeps what he thinks he needs. He stores it up and takes responsibility for himself and thinks, I've got this. I'll take what I need. And he just gives God the bare minimum of what he's got left. He gives God the leftovers. And then, having given God the leftovers, he wants God's favour as well. He's got no right to expect it. He shouldn't. And it just shows that basic misunderstanding that Cain has, which is that if you tick the box, this legalistic God will say, yes, you've met the criteria, you've done what I asked you to do, therefore you get your blessing. But God sees the heart, and he knows that Cain's heart is not in what he's doing. I want to give 3 examples of what this looks like in practice, because I think what the behaviour and the attitudes that we see from Cain and from Abel apply directly to how we live today. Let me give you one example. I've had some terrible cars over the years. One was a Mazda and one was a Volvo. Now, they are 2 of the most reliable cars you could ever imagine. And yet I bought 2 terrible cars. I don't know how it happened. No, I do. It happened because I did what I thought was right. I did my research. I trawled the internet. I found the best deals. I bought the cars and they were terrible. And I've had a habit over the years of buying a car, sitting in it on the first day after I've bought it and going, God, would you bless this car that I have decided to buy and already paid for? It's too late now, so you're going to have to bless it, please. And that's kind of the wrong way to go about it, isn't it? What if I actually came to God and said, God, I'm at the point where I think I need a new car. I need to change car. Would you guide me and lead me and show me what you would like me to drive and how you want me to do it? Would you give me the opportunity? Would you help me to know how to use the finances that you've given me? And there is something in giving that whole decision to God that is about giving our best. It's a bit like buying a car, asking God to bless it, and then saying, I tell you what, Lord, find me a parking space. That's the bit I'll pray about. Find me a parking space. Now, a few years ago, 10 years or so ago, I was a teacher. And I was ready to go into school leadership. I'd be at the point where I'd been teaching a few years, and it was time to kick on with the career, to move into a position of responsibility, to earn some more money, to be quite honest. It was time. It was just the natural next step for me in my career. And so I was ready. I'd signed up to a leadership training program. It was all laid out. I knew what my kind of 5-year and 10-year plans were. And yet I just felt God was saying, I've got something else for you. I've got something different that I would like you to do. Now, I could have said, no, this is what I'm doing. This is my career. This is my future. I need to earn the money I'm entitled to earn. I need to take on the responsibility that I'm worthy of. I need to fulfill my potential. But God was asking me to step out of teaching and to move into church ministry. And so I did. The doors opened and the pathway was laid before me, and all I had to do was step forward and do it. But that took an act of offering myself and my best part of myself and saying, this is me, our careers often define us. And I was having to say, God, I trust you with my career. I'm giving it to you. This is the best part of who I am. I place it before you, and I trust that as I step into what you've got for me, I will find your favor. And I was reflecting that 10 years down the line, I'm now earning about the same amount that I was earning 10 years ago, which is just not how you go about a career, is it? That is absolutely not the way to do it. And yet we have never gone without. We have never been short of anything. God's provision, God's kindness, God's generosity has just been evident throughout. Because I didn't do it my way. I didn't make my own decisions and look after myself and give God the leftovers. I said, yes, Lord, you can have it all. Third example, and it's always the best example because it's Jesus. Jesus is the perfect example, isn't he, of the one who offered everything of himself. He could, because he's God, he could have said to the Father, I'm not doing this plan where I die and I suffer. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to come up with something else. I want you to bless it, Father, because I'm going to do that instead. Instead, it says in Philippians chapter 2, it says, Jesus, in being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by being obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. When Jesus brought his whole self completely in surrender as an offering to the Father, yes, there was that awful humility that he had to endure, and yet there was the exaltation that came as a result. Do we know that God is enough? Do we know that he has given us enough? He's given us enough in terms of his provision for our financial needs, our material needs, our relationships. Everything is there for us. Do we recognize that? Do we trust him enough with our reputation? Do we trust him enough with our finances and our work? Do we trust him enough to lay it all before him and say, God, this is for you because you love me and you've given me everything I could possibly need? I think that's the point. I will leave it. I will hand back to the guys and move into Conversation Street.
Fantastic. Here Matt comes. Wow. I absolutely love that. I didn't get a chocolate though, but I don't want one because I'm gonna be like a friend to those who are watching online. But I'm glad people are here, and also I'd still be getting toffee out of my mouth. But I love that idea. I love that thought of the emergency Christmas present. I feel quite bad for all the ones that I've given now. I thought I was being really like sneaky and clever, always having a box of chocolates in the back cupboard.
Well, you can't go wrong with chocolate, can you? Really,
you can't. Box of chocolates and
I
biscuits.
do like the idea. I mean, they're all on the floor down here, but I do like the idea of taking all the rubbish ones out, putting them in a box, and then giving them to people. Is that the point?
I mean, you've maybe missed it just a little bit, but it's.
Maybe just a little bit. Well, listen, guys. Pete, thank you for the talk, man. It was great. Loved it. I love this story about Cain and Abel, and this idea of sacrifice and what it means. And I want to get into this because there's a number of questions here. Let me go back to the beginning. How should Cain have responded to God's rejection of his offering? What lessons can we learn about handling disappointment? Because that's a really interesting question, right? In this story, you have Cain who fails, for want of a better expression, and rather than examining his own shortcomings, he becomes resentful and he becomes bitter. And that's probably not the best way to deal with that situation. But we see so many people, I think, in modern culture doing this, right? And so we can learn from this story and go, actually, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from this and examine our own hearts? So what do you think?
So, I mean, it's not entirely clear from the passage whether Cain's gift is accepted or not. It sort of implies that it is, and it's just the issue is more that God favours Abel. So it's not so much that Cain is rejected; it's more that Abel is preferred, and that's as a sibling, that is not a nice feeling to have. I think what's kind of mad is Cain just doesn't get God at all. He's just completely misunderstood who God is and what God's like. And so when God says, "Hey, just be careful here," he doesn't think, "All right, I'll be careful." He just doubles down. He doubles down on the selfishness and the I must sort this out. And so I think the short answer is he should have tried to be more like his brother. But who really wants? Who
wants to
that?
hear that? Yeah. Who wants to hear that comment? Have you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's as if he doesn't believe. I love what Pete was talking about, do we believe that God has enough? And it's as if he's thinking, well, I've missed the blessing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the key parts of this story, that there is enough blessing to go round for all, and God is enough. Yeah. But he's so caught up. I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and there are moments where something happens and the emotions just overwhelm them, and they cannot get out of that anger or jealousy or that. This morning someone took my daughter's balloon. I couldn't find it anywhere, and that was it for half an hour.
Wow.
And I kind of see that in Cain.
Yeah.
It's like, duh. Once you look into the story, and it's explained brilliantly by Pete, and you can look into it and dwell in it, you're like, come on, Cain, there is enough. And, it's as if actually God would have accepted his offering.
Yeah.
And he's giving him enough chance. He's not, it's not one strike and you're out with God, but God is engaging with him pastorally. He's engaging with him, trying to let him see. He wants to bless Cain, but he just isn't getting it.
Yeah.
And so how should he respond? I don't know what you do in those moments when you just can't see the wood from the trees, but he shouldn't have gone and done what he did.
That much we do know. And I think you're right. I think there's this. I read the story and I see Cain's inability for self-reflection. If I was to put like modern phraseology on it, he's very narcissistic. It's all about him, right? And so he didn't get his way. And there's a great quote which says that true sacrifice involves giving up something valuable for a greater good, often requiring struggle and self-discipline. Cain's failure lies in his unwillingness to make such a sacrifice and accept the responsibility for that, right? And I think I look at it and I think here's a story of a man, and I speak to men here. Here's a story of a man who did not accept responsibility, who put blame on somebody else, who became what we now call victim culture, right? He was the victim. He becomes angry not at his brother necessarily, but God and the whole institution itself. That's what he's railing against. And I think you can't do that. God requires something more of us, and sacrifice is laying something down in us, whether it's that feeling or need to be angry and bitter and go, you know what, this is not the best way forward, and putting that down, So I think that self-reflection, that humility was missing. And I see it on Twitter every day. Well, no, it's not Twitter now, is it? It's X. I see it on X or Facebook or whatever, just that I am right, you're wrong, and this is the way it is, and I think we can learn so much from that.
Yeah. I guess sacrifice, I thought as you were talking, why would we sacrifice something? It's got to be because we believe in the reason to sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult just to sacrifice for the sake of sacrificing. There's got to be a reason. And for him, I think it comes back down to, what else might it be if it's not him believing God is enough?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a heart issue, is what it comes down to. His heart is not in it. He sees that he sees a transactional God, who, if you put the right amount of coins in the slot, you'll get the stuff back out. There's no actual desire to honour God and give God what God is worth in response to what God's done.
Yeah.
It's just I have to do this thing so that I can get this thing out. And then God says, no, that's not how it works. I can see that you don't really care.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I'm not going to favour you and prefer what you've done.
Yeah. One of the questions that's come in here is trusting God. If God is enough, which is obviously a very powerful... Do we know that God is enough, I think, is a very powerful question. But does trusting him mean giving up free will for our lives? So where does free will connect in with this? So, because we would say as Christians we have free will, right? That this is one of the big reasons we read Genesis, and that's the overarching theme is there is free will. But is it free will if ultimately we have to trust God anyway? Do you know what I mean? I suppose it's free will in the choice to trust God, but if we don't and things go wrong, is that really free will? So what do you think? That's a bit of a philosophical...
It's a big question, isn't
it? Yeah.
First thoughts. I guess, yes, we've got free will, but the consequence of going our own way and not God's way aren't great. So we have free will. Yeah. We have free will. And I think, for me, why do I choose to do things God's way? It's because time and time again, I've tried things my own way at my young years of 38. And now
stop it.
But increasingly, I do find actually God's way is best.
Yeah.
And so now that sacrifice is a joyful thing. It's a bit more second nature to do the right thing most of the time, not all the time. But I think we do have free will, and ultimately now the sacrifice of doing it God's way is actually, I feel better doing it because I know I'm going to be blessed in this way, and I know I'm going to please the Father if I do it in these ways. So I think experience does have something to play into it as well.
And I think free will is an element of choice, isn't it? And the Bible says, I've set before you death and life, blessing and curse, therefore choose life, right? You get to make the choice. I've set before you donuts and a carrot, too many calories, not enough calories, therefore choose a healthy option. Do you know what I mean? We have free will. That doesn't always create the right outcome, but we have free will in that, I think. Callum wants to know. Anna said here, I think that's so true. We can easily treat God like a transaction. If you do X, if I do X, you'll give me Y. It's very, very true. Callum says, how do we discern from our voice and God's voice? Can you speak from personal experience? How do you know? Like, so your story, right, when you were a teacher, and you talked about how you felt God was saying, no, you're not doing that anymore. Come do this. Was that God? Was that too much pizza the night before? How did you figure that out?
I don't have any issues with dairy, so I don't think it was that. I think for me, there was a sense of being unsettled, and a sense of being a restlessness in my spirit. That might be quite a good spiritual way to put it. There was just a sense of, I'm doing this because this feels like what I'm supposed to do, but it doesn't quite feel right. And what I actually did, because it was a process of 2-3 months. I basically took some time, and I prayed and fasted, and I had a journal, and I met with a load of different Christian leaders to talk about what's it like running a church. What kind of things do you need to, what kind of characteristics do you need? How did you know? How did you know you were called to do this? Because I wanted to be absolutely sure that if I was going to do this, it was a calling. In all honesty, I was quite happy to leave education.
Yeah.
Okay. But I didn't leave education because I wanted to leave education.
Yeah.
I left because I was called into something else. And so I think for me it was taking the time to stop and listen and pray and seek and ask, what is this a calling on my life?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that really clinched it for me was there was one day where I was lined up, I had a meeting lined up with a church leader, and my verse for the day was there's the verse, and I've completely forgotten where it is. Jackie will probably help me, where it names the different roles of callings.
Ephesians 4.
That's it. Yes,
Apostles,
thank you.
prophets,
Exactly.
pastors,
Yeah.
teachers,
And literally, and that was the kind of the thought for the day that came through by email. But it only said some are called to be pastors.
Yeah.
It left all the others off.
Yeah.
And on the day that I was going to meet a church leader to talk about the possibility that I might be called to do that, that was it.
Yeah.
And so it was little things like that, and the way all the doors opened in terms of getting a part-time role that enabled me to go and study.
Yeah.
My church paid for me to study. All of those things, the doors just opened, and it was just so clear that was what I was being called to do.
And I think that's a really powerful point, that you, with such a big decision, you took time. You talked to other people about it. You prayed about it. You weren't in a rush. The Bible says if you make haste, you're unwise. And I think listen, if you're watching online and you're a Christian, just write in the comments, how do you know it's God talking to you? Share a story, share a thought, share an idea. We'd love to hear, how do you know it's God speaking? Because there are some psychologists that would say, hearing voices, not a good thing. Do you know what I mean? And so how do we know we're not all psychotic?
Yeah. And I was thinking that there's some big moments in life that you really want to be sure of. So I've had a number of examples where, even recently, I'm saying, God, would you show us which way to go on a certain thing with work? And we're asking a couple of people just for prophetic words that they might pray about. It might be a scripture, it might be a picture. And it's happened a number of times in my life where I've asked 2 or 3 people to help me discern God's voice, because it's a really big decision. And I could give those examples. I won't, just for time. But I love this concept of, in Matthew 18, the concept of the kingdom of God coming from being like a child, and that thought of, as a 1 or 2 year old, picking up on learning language it takes a long time to hear your mother and father's voice and to learn a language. And I think this is one of the big things to grow as a disciple of Jesus, that we learn to hear his voice. It's really important, but it doesn't come quickly. And so the small examples and the small things that we go through every day, that's where the fun is. And just my encouragement would be, just give it a go.
Keep going.
Try. You're going to get it wrong sometimes. But when you look back a year, 2 years in, you'll be like, oh, this is how you hear God. And this is when reading the word and something jumps out to me. This is when it wasn't the word jumping out to me. I just liked that.
Yeah.
But then another time it was God speaking, or a sunrise or something. Or often for me it's prophetic words, and 2 or 3 coming within the space of a couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, that's got to be God saying something to me.
Yeah. And I think that the thing is, Jesus said, my sheep, us, basically, I know I don't look like a sheep, but apparently I am. My sheep know my voice, right? And the voice of a stranger they will not follow. Jesus said that, I think, in John 14. And I think the thing that I've learned is God is a creative God. There is an infinite number of ways he is going to communicate to us. It's never going to be the same way twice. It just isn't. But God will get through to us and we will know. That has been my general experience.
I think just to add to that, you recognise, one of the ways you recognise God's voice is that it's unusual.
Yeah.
You almost have to expect the unexpected.
Yeah.
So logic told me that I go into school leadership now. That's my next step. Convention tells me that's what you do. Colleagues would tell me that's what you do. And actually God said something different, and that's almost one of the ways you can tell it's God, because it's not what you're expecting. It's not what everyone else is saying. It almost not quite defies logic, and you can test it out by looking at scripture and seeing, does this fit with what I understand about God? Does it fit with what people have experienced? But expecting the unexpected is part of it as well.
That's such a good point. Love this question. When does Cain's question, am I my brother's keeper? What does Cain's question, am I my brother's keeper, reveal about his attitude towards responsibility for others, and how does this apply to us today? Jack. I love being able to, I just love asking the questions.
What power you have in the question.
Yeah.
It's funny because I said to my Judah today at lunch, because he'd clearly done something, and I quoted this back at him because we've been looking at it, and I don't know the answer to that question. Can you ask the question again? It was quite a long one.
So I'll try and read it more clearly this time. What does Cain's question, am I my brother's keeper? So that was the question Cain asked to God, right? Yeah. What does that reveal about his attitude towards responsibility for others? How does this apply to us today?
I still don't really have an answer, but so chip in. Go on.
I can share something on that. So there is something, and this kind of reflects a little bit about this unexpected stuff, the unexpectedness of God, which is this thing that doesn't make sense in any other area of society. If you look at everything around us, it says look after yourself. Yeah. It's all about self, self-fulfillment. Yeah. Follow your dreams.
Self-esteem.
Exactly, all of that stuff. Yeah. And yet, God says, look after others.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you'll find fulfillment for yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
and Cain experiences that. He's like, nothing to do with me, even though he's just killed him. So there's definitely a bit of gaslighting going on. It's kind of, who ate that last donut? What donut? It's that kind of thing, isn't it? But so there's something of that going on, but there's also, I'm not responsible for that. Because he's got that mindset that says, I'm responsible for myself, and therefore he's responsible for himself. Whereas God says, love your neighbour as you love yourself.
Yeah. And you can't get away from it, can you? Yeah. Bye, Ivy. Sneaking off there. Ivy did worship earlier on. It was beautiful. Bless you. I think it's such an important point. You're right that Christianity is quite unique in its calling, in that we live in a world and a society which is so hyper individualistic, right? And it's all about me, my rights, my wants. And I think it's changing in some respects, but I think, and again, this comes back to this self-sacrifice, doesn't it? You can't be sacrificial if it's all about you. I'm sacrificing this for myself. It just doesn't work, does it? And so it's all about laying something down for the benefit of somebody else. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, in many ways you are. Now, am I responsible for crazy things they do? Not necessarily, but the Scripture is clear. You've got to prefer them above yourself, right? You've got to love them as Christ loved the church. That doesn't mean I have to like everybody, which is very good news. But I do have to love everybody, and I think it's a really interesting one in a culture which values self and selfishness at such a high rate, doesn't it? The me, myself, and I kind of thing.
Yeah, and I was listening to a podcast the other day, Justin Brierley, and he's talking about how actually, there is this obsession with self, and yet we are in the middle of the biggest mental health crisis globally that has ever been known, and yet the obsession is with self, which clearly tells us that that's not working.
Yeah. Yeah, self-help, self-esteem, all that, when it comes from self, is fundamentally problematic. And again, it goes back to what you said, I think, right at the start, Pete. This, for me, then becomes a question of identity. Do you know what I mean? Who are you, and where do you get that sense of identity from? Does it come from the depths of Christ himself? And I think it has to, if we're going to have any sense of purpose, any sense of meaning going forward, But yeah, there's a few more questions which we've not got time to get to, but thank you so much for your questions. I enjoyed Conversation Street tonight. Is that all right?
I enjoyed it too. Thank you very much for posting in those questions. And
are we getting a round of applause from the young members of the audience there?
Yeah, come on. And thank you, Pete. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Pete. Thanks for coming in. Next week, we have our very own Dan Orange speaking to us. Is that right, Dan? You are aware of this, yeah? So Dan's speaking to us next week.
That means, Matt, you're on tech.
Means I'm on tech, so we really need to fix this problem because I will not have a clue. So Dan's joining us next. I think Anna is hosting with Jan, so do come and join. What are you talking about next week? The flood. Dun, 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 dun. Did it happen? Did it not happen? Was it worldwide? Was it just an isolated incident? We're going to get into all of that. I don't know if you're actually going to talk about that, Dan, but I've told everybody you are now, so you might have to change it. There's definitely lots to fit in. So do come join us for part 10 of the conversation with Genesis. We are going to sign off in just a few seconds. Before we go, let me tell you, if you are online and you would like to come join us in the Google Meets room, as soon as this live stream ends, give me about 30 seconds and we will open up the Google Meets room. I'll be in there. Pete will come and say hi. Jack's going to come say hi. We would love to meet you online. So do come and say hello. Come, if you've got more questions, come and ask them. But if you've been in before, come back, come say hi. It'd be great to see you. The URL is go.crowd.church/meet. It'll be in the comments. Hopefully so. Is that right? Yep, we got a thumbs up there, which is great. So they're in the comments. Do come join us. We would love to see you in there. But anything else from you in closing, Jack?
In thinking that we're going to get Noah next week, I'm just reminded that God so wants a people for himself. He's adamant. He's bent on getting a person whose lineage would get somebody who can defeat this snake. So that's my little setup for next week. I don't know if you're going to cover that, but you just see that God so wants a people for himself, and a flood is next in store on this story throughout the Bible that we're going through. So,
very good.
Yeah, it's
fantastic.
It's good.
Thank you, Pete. Anything else from you in closing? But any final thoughts?
No. Don't kill your siblings. That'd probably be my main takeaway.
Main takeaway: do not kill your brother. It's not worth it. You heard it here first. That's all I'm saying. Or maybe not first, but you heard it anyway. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to be with you. God bless you. Do get in touch with us. Would love to hear from you. Love to hear your story. But that's it from all of us here at Crowd. Bye for now.